feeling like I was being smothered by my family and not having the opportunity to experience life. Now, as a mom, I understand my parents, and especially my mom's best interests for me and for my upbringing, but I am very much a free bird and a free spirit. And my first challenge was self-imposed in the sense that I decided to leave a very comfortable life in Brazil, where I was born and raised, to marry my American husband and move to the United States. So
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I am your host, Stacey Yearning, and today my guest is Marta Spirk. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Marta. She's a wife. She's a triplet mom, recording artist, TEDx speaker, one of my greatest goals, author, and visibility strategist. She empowers women entrepreneurs to be seen by standing out on social media, stages, TV, and more so they can increase visibility, credibility, and profit. But what I really wanted to bring her on today was, no surprise, talk about a life challenge that she had and how she overcame it, because how she overcame it is going to be the meat of today's episode, something we have not talked about here. It's going to be a little tip, a tool, a technique that you can bring back to you after the episode. So welcome, Marta. How are you? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about a life challenge that you had and how did that affect your, present day life?
Yeah. So I want to say that there were two monumental challenges, but the first one really was feeling like I was being smothered by my family and not having the opportunity to experience life. Now, as a mom, I understand my parents, and especially my mom's best interests for me and for my upbringing, but I am very much a free bird and a free spirit. And my first challenge was self-imposed in the sense that I decided to leave a very comfortable life in Brazil, where I was born and raised, to marry my American husband and move to the United States. So it was almost like we eloped in a sense. Because it was everything really, really fast. We had known each other for 5 years, but it was, a long distance relationship. We were never together for several months at a time. It was like a few days, 10 days tops at a time, several times a year, but it's still not the same as having, a local relationship. And we got engaged, and in 3 months I left. And I had never lived by myself before, let alone in another country. I was 23 years old, and it was my chance to experience the world, but as a married woman.
Now, I won't get too deep into the back end of it because I want to focus so much today on the tool. Yeah. Okay. But do you feel as though, part of the quickness to that was like a running away from feeling so tied down?
Yes. 100%. Like that was the only solution in my mind.
It's like an escape.
Was doing that. Like there wasn't anything else that I could do because, in Brazil, the situation is a little bit different from here. Like usually you go to college in a different state, most likely, or even if it's in the same state and if it's local, you live in the dorms. Like you have a chance to have your life. This is not common in Brazil. You're born and you stay where you are for the majority of your life, unless your parents get transferred because of work, but it's not common. It really is not common down there. And so this was my solution. And it was hard. It was hard because once I left, I started missing, I enjoyed the new and learning everything, but it was still tough because I was not prepared to be an adult. I was raised to be dependent, which is very much culture as well with Latin culture, right? The majority of people, they stay home until they get married. And the reality here in the United States is so different. So I didn't know how to wash my own clothes. I didn't really know how to cook. I never had to really clean, scrub toilets or do any of that stuff. So, that was a huge challenge. Not only that, but the fact that I didn't have friends. It was my husband and his friends, which were all guys, many of them single.
Yes. What were you running away from?
So I was running away from a very strict upbringing. So I grew up a Christian. I am a woman of faith, but it was just a really harsh environment at the time. That's how I perceived it in many ways. Very
Like
overprotective.
conservatively fundamental, where did you feel as though you were just kind of being shamed for who you were, or you just didn't have a lot of freedoms to explore life?
I didn't have a lot of freedoms to explore life, period. Plus we lived in the suburbs, and it was like a small neighborhood of sorts where it was really a
Mm-hmm.
bubble and everybody knew each other. And I was just ready to go do stuff, that I never was able to do, like not being able to get home late and always being asked questions. Where were you? Who were you with? Just feeling like I was never treated like an adult, really. Like I had my own agency because I was living under their roof too. So it was a very tricky situation in many ways. So that's what I was running away from, is I want to be my own person, and with the culture, but also with my family dynamics, it was not possible.
So you move away, and you don't just like move within South or Central America. I mean, you move, to a whole different continent essentially. And how does your family react to that?
So my mom took it the hardest. She was very much against it in the beginning. And it was actually my dad that helped the most because, and later on, like actually recently, a couple of years ago, he said, I decided to help you because I knew you weren't going to change your mind. There was a point when I understood that's what you were going to do, and I might as well be supportive than not. And then my mom follows suit with that.
Mhm.
But in the back of their minds, they were convinced that it wasn't going to work out. And they wanted me to have a backup plan. So plan B was go get a degree. So that's what I did, which was helpful. I'm very grateful that that was something that they helped me with. They helped me get through a master's program. Because then I had something that was mine. I had a schedule. I had somewhere to be. I made friends, so that was good. And then once I was done, once I graduated, they convinced us, or they asked us to move to Brazil and try out living down there. And that's what we did. And then the
And
next
how did
challenge
that?
comes.
I was going to say, so you've now, how long were you in the States?
So I was here for 3 years.
And how did it go with you guys moving back?
So right off the bat, I already knew that I was not as fond of the culture, which I hadn't been anyways. That's why I had left. But I thought, now I have the person that I love with me, and I'm looking forward to him understanding my culture and learning the language and being around here. And in a way, I was looking forward to the luxuries that I had beforehand. Now I can, have
Mm.
care of stuff for me, even if I'm living in my own home. It's very common to have help in Brazil, to have, somebody that cleans the house, that does your laundry, all of that stuff. So I was like, now I get a break. I've done the crazy wild life for a little bit. Now I can go back. But then I felt again, very stuck in many ways. Like I wanted this, but not to this degree. And
Mm.
it's almost like I didn't adapt again. And it was not something that I liked. But still we stayed there for 3 years. And my husband's experience, which also contributed to my own personal challenge, was that he didn't adapt to the culture either. I mean, he did his best. He learned Portuguese on his own, which was amazing. And he's still fluent to this day, which is great. But there was a lot of culture shock and his values, especially at work. That was really hard for him to adapt. And ultimately, I was the one that decided we should move back.
Hmm. So
So,
you guys moved back.
well, before that, actually, since I was down there living close to families, when we decided to start trying to have a baby. And to our surprise, we actually got pregnant with triplets. So that was something else and that put, I think, really the nail on the coffin for me to decide that I wanted to move back. I was already wanting to move back once the kids were old enough. But there were so many other things that were going on, like him at work, because he was working with my dad. So that was tough as well, working with family. His dad was sick. He was terminal with cancer at the time. And we actually expedited the move. And I was the one that said, let's just go now. Let's just go, because all these things are happening. I would rather go somewhere where I have less help with the kids, but have more freedom to do what I want than to have all these expectations around me on how to raise my kids as a first-time mom. So again, I ran away and I left. And I would say that the second time was really harder than the first because the kids were involved.
Mm.
And it was tough because it was almost like I had to choose between my parents or my new family at this point. Before it was my parents and this person I don't really know. So it felt, don't really know, in quotation marks, because it was a long distance relationship. So it felt like a fun adventure for me to go and try it out of spite almost. Whereas the second time around, it was me making a very informed decision. Like, it's risky, I understand, but I am old enough now to do this. It's not just because I want to venture out. This is what's best for me right now and for my family, which doesn't mean that it was easy or not scary. But we left. And I remember my mom even cried on the phone and said, I can't go in person and say goodbye because it's too hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really tough. And so were the next, I would say, 4 years.
I thought you were going to say like 5 years, because how old were your kids at that point?
They were 9 months old.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And did you move to an area where you guys knew people?
So we moved back to where we were before. So in Denver, so the same place. But my husband's family is from out of state. So they came to visit, they came to help, but ultimately I was essentially on my own while he was working.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that, again, it was self-imposed. I couldn't have fathomed how challenging it would be. I understood it would be challenging. But yeah, it was hard.
So fast forward 5 years, what do you learn about yourself in that experience?
Yeah, so this is where the tool comes in. Can I reveal the tool?
Yeah, please.
So this is where I started diving into personal development a lot because, postpartum, hormonal, things I had never experienced before, the guilt of, am I doing this right? And then having family or just whoever doing things differently and questioning myself. Am I being a good mom? Am I doing this right? Am I crazy? All of those things. I started leaning on resources that could help me make sense out of what I was feeling and really find myself, right? So who am I?
What were you feeling? Can we tap into that for a second?
Yeah. I think it was a lot of guilt and shame, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
That because right off the bat, once I moved, I started working with network marketing. So we had made the decision when we moved back that I was going to stay home with the kids. And that was kind of a point of contention for us because I actually had 2 degrees and my husband had none. And he's like, you could get a better paying job than I could so much faster or easier. And I said, no. I said, I don't even want to try. That's not what I'm going to do. I just had 3 kids. There's no way you can ask this of me. However, pretty much right as we got here, I would say about 2 weeks in, being on the internet, being on social media, I found an opportunity that seemed good because that's how they sell it, right? Make money off your phone, all that stuff. And this is at a time, think about it, 7 years ago, that was 2016. direct sales was all the rage. I know it's still out there,
I
but
mean, I joined direct sales at that time. I would say 2015. I still have my direct sales business. I never promote it.
mhm,
And I did build it in a way that I do have a nice income from it still, but I worked very hard at it.
right. So you understand the conundrum then of it takes time out of your
Mhm.
day, but it also takes time, throughout the days to build this thing, which I
No
didn't
doubt.
necessarily have. But I had to get organized with the schedule and with the structure to be able to build it. And that was hard because what was expected of me and what was agreed upon was that I was going to raise the kids. But knowing myself and knowing my personality, I couldn't sit still. And that's where the Enneagram came in to help me um, normalize the way I am and understand that there are people that would be perfectly content, or I don't even want to say content, they would prefer, I should say, not adding anything else on. Whereas I could not help myself, but
Yeah.
add something else on. And I felt really, really bad about that. But then
In
looking
what
back,
way? Like so I have so many thoughts about this and we're gonna chat, but
okay,
you know, I know exactly what you're saying because there have been times in my life where people will come to me and be like, I can't believe how much you take on,
mm,
which to me actually doesn't feel like a lot,
mhm,
which I always find very interesting because I know when I'm overtaxed and overstressed.
mhm,
And usually when people are saying this to me, I'm not. So I think I tend to just be able to like to handle a lot of things. I like to learn. I like to be engaged. I like to be creative. I like to use my mind. But I have come across people over my 19 years of parenting, because you meet so many different kinds of moms
oh yeah,
who like literally run around like a chicken without a head. So, like,
mhm,
they don't say no to anything. They overextend themselves. They get themselves deep into everything. And
mhm,
I've always found a lot of curiosity in that
mhm,
because that makes me uncomfortable. I
mm,
might be busy in my professional life and in my own personal life, but I was never one to overextend and then feel like I should take that into all these other pieces. And I was always the mom who kind of like raged against the machine in the sense like I said no to a lot of things that a lot of parents were saying yes to, as far as like overscheduling the kids and like keeping that part of life moving at a pace that I knew we could not keep up with and was not going to be good for my kids.
yeah,
um, I have a very interesting perspective on Enneagrams. So I'm very curious. So I love what you're saying. What you're saying is, I never felt like I could sit still, which
mhm,
is the thread throughout this, right?
yeah,
You rushed away from Brazil at 23 because that felt there was something about, and we didn't get into this, but in my trauma coach mind, I'm like, there was something about a feeling you were having between the ages of whatever till 22 that you were running from. I'm not saying you weren't in love with your husband,
yeah,
but it was like an
oh
extreme
yeah,
move,
yep,
right? And then you come back, and then all of a sudden you're running away from it again at a time where it's like probably not the best time because you've got 3 9 months old. Note to self: 1 9 month old's a kick in the pants. So like, so three, and then
mhm,
moving to another country where you don't know anybody, like it's pretty extreme. So I have a lot of thoughts about that too. But
mhm,
I see it as like an extreme escape. Like
mhm,
I'm escaping something here that doesn't feel right.
mhm,
So you dive into this Enneagram because you want to understand why
mhm,
you can't sit still.
yeah.
And what do you learn about yourself in the Enneagram?
Yeah. So what I learned, this came later on in more depth, but I'll just share here right now. But right off the bat, what I learned was there's nothing wrong with me. There are actually people that are built this way, that express themselves this way, that have these motivations, that have these goals. very similar to yours, to mine. So you're not alone. There's nothing broken per se.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way you developed. And then later
Mm-hmm.
on, what I came to understand, which has everything to do with what you just said in terms of trauma, is there are childhood wounds that created my personality.
Right.
And there are things that I interpreted
That's
in
right.
my childlike mind that now as a grown up. So you see, like I was understanding all of this while raising them. And it was just tough because at the same time, I realized this is happening right now in real time with them. Oh my
Amen.
gosh, I'm doing this right
Yeah.
now.
And now I have to course correct really fucking fast.
I know. So it was a lot. It was a lot. But then it gave me the motivation to continue diving into that
Yeah.
because that is what was going to enable me to actually be intentional with what I was doing. But to the outside, meaning my family, and my husband many times, it seemed like I was just creating a distraction for myself, which I know there was a part of that because it's like it's the only thing that I have outside of taking care
You
of them.
mean diving into the Enneagram?
Yes. And into
So I
personal
want to,
development in general.
I think we need to, for just the purpose of the podcast, I think we
Mhm.
need to step 2 steps back and define what an Enneagram is and explain to people who are not in the Enneagram know
Mhm.
what this is, because they're going to be like, I don't even know what the heck an Enneagram is.
Yeah. So the Enneagram is a personality framework. It's not an assessment or a test like you think Myers-Briggs or DISC or something Strengths Finder. You can take a test or you can have a session with a certified Enneagram coach to type you to figure out what your type is. But the reason why it's called a framework, it's because you really need to dive deep and understand all of it to be able to single yourself out. To be able to understand yourself, it's important to understand what you're not as well. Like, oh yeah, for sure, this does not bother me. This is not a problem. I did not grow up thinking this, but what did I grow up thinking? So that's what it helps you understand it. And then go back into your childhood and say, it started there. Whatever it is that you're struggling with now, it actually started there for better or for worse. In different scenarios, it happens differently for different people, but it did have a root there and you carried this on with you. And there are 9 types. So in
Yeah.
this framework, there have been identified 9 different types. Obviously, they overlap. Obviously, we are a little bit of everything. But at the end of the day, the Enneagram focuses on motivations and not necessarily behavior. Obviously, you're going to have patterns of behavior, but that's not what defines your Enneagram type. What defines your Enneagram type is your main motivation. And this motivation comes from whatever it is that happened in your childhood. So when you wake up
Yeah.
in the morning, this is what I tell people. How do you type yourself? Because at times it's very common, and I went through this myself. You feel torn between a couple types when you read the
Yeah, I
descriptions.
have.
And at the end of the day, it's like when you wake up in the morning, what is the one thing that you would rather have? So for me, I was torn between type 7 and type 3. Type 7 is the enthusiast, and it's all about the adventure and fun and trying new things and not risk taking. That's 100% me too. But then type 3 has a lot to do with recognition and achievement and really receiving praise from people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I wake up in the morning, that's when I realized, whoever it was that I listened to that was like, think about this. Like, what's your main thing? What would you if you could only pick between these 2 things, venture off and do something fun and different, or be in front of people, have people recognize you for who you are and for your gifts and whatever. Which one would you choose? And ultimately, for me, it's 3. It's
Yeah,
the
and I
recognition.
always find it so interesting. So I'm so glad you were able to so easily tie it back to, you know, childhood, because that's always been my understanding. And I always look at these 9 Enneagram types as coping strategies,
Mhm.
survival skills,
Totally.
the ways that we learned how to manage effectively stress
Yeah.
or our environment or whatever it is, just life in general,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
What I have found for me is if I take not an assessment per se, but if I'm trying to map out, let's say, my Enneagram number and my Enneagram type, if I do that based on who I was before I was 18, I'm
Hmm.
like between an 8 and a 9. But if I do it today, I'm between a 2 and a 3.
Hmm.
And I don't really have as much the qualities, if you will, of the other type, right? The 9 type. And I think it's just because as I've evolved and as I've gained wisdom from my own experiences and as I've changed how I navigate life and how I cope with life and how I integrate myself into life,
Hmm.
it's almost like it's my more mature Enneagram type
Hmm.
versus the Enneagram type from my 1.0 version, where like I was still in the midst of the shit.
Hmm.
And, you know, I was much more of a fighter and a rebel and an activist and like loud and bold. And not to say I'm not those things,
Yeah.
but I've learned let me put it this way, I've connected back to myself,
Mm.
and myself tends to yield more on the other side. Does that make sense?
Totally. Well, and this is actually explained by the framework. So something that I didn't say is the actual definition of the word Enneagram. So Ennea is 9 and gram is a diagram, right? So when you look at the 9 types, there is actually a graphic for that shows how they are connected, how the numbers are connected. And there is something called an integration ladder, meaning when you are more of yourself, which is exactly what you just described, which happens with
Mm-hmm.
age, and obviously intentionality of you wanting to be more of yourself and diving into your own, personal discovery, you take on characteristics of a different type. So it's not that you
Yeah.
change your type, but you're a healthier version. When you're a healthier version of the type you were always, since childhood, you take on healthy characteristics of a different number. So that's why what I said in the beginning, it's a framework. You have to understand all of them.
Yeah.
You're going to be ideally moving towards a different type as you integrate the strengths of your type.
I love it. And I love that we're talking about this because, when it comes to quote unquote trauma recovery coaching, which is like such a big word and such a scary concept for so many people, we're really talking about, you put it well, and I use this terminology a lot, the wounds, right? Experiences, bumps we had up against something early on in childhood. Let's just call it that. We're bumping up against something early on in childhood, and either it leaves a mark or it doesn't. And sometimes we bump up against the same thing over and over and over again, and it does create a wound.
Yeah.
And if we don't have the appropriate resources within us or around us to help us heal the wound, it kind of stays unhealed, obviously, but almost like with just the lightest scab. So then, like when triggers come up, it kind of scrapes it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then these coping strategies of how we dealt with this pain, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, psychological, come to the forefront.
Yeah.
So much of what I do with people is helping them understand what are those wounds that have yet to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
And then what are ways that we can heal it? So not only does the scab get to stay, but the new skin gets to grow over it. And it's like a healthy wound that really can't get marked open again. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I love the idea that you use the idea of the wounds. I love the fact that we're talking about how these Enneagram types can shift over time.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's now just curious, because we've really only glossed over the surface of Enneagrams, we could spend a whole hour doing just Enneagrams, and maybe we will. Like maybe I'll have you do that with me on another episode, and we can talk it out real time so people can get a feel of how that would work. Because I know there are some coaches that literally just use an Enneagram as their tool, whereas like I use RTT as my tool, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to learn more about what you do and more about the Enneagram, what's a good resource for them?
So I actually developed my own quiz because I know the challenge of right off the bat, I need to study 9 types. I'm out of here, right? I don't want to do that to understand mine. So I created my own quiz. I call it empowered personality types because a lot of the language that I use in my business is around empowerment. And I grouped the 9 in 3 groups. So you take a quiz, it's like 8 questions, it's really simple. And you already know in which group you fall in. And then from then on, it's a lot easier for you to identify which of 3 types you are because you're part of that group. And you can find that at my website, martaspirk.com/quiz, or just martaspirk.com, and take the quiz and see if you're a feeler, a thinker, or a doer. And I describe in the results what the numbers are for each of those. So that's an easy way.
So I have a little challenge here. This is what I think we should do. I
Okay.
think when we wrap up today, I'm going to go take it.
Okay.
And then let's schedule the next podcast interview. Let's do another episode where you're revealing to me, what those are. I mean, obviously I'll probably get an email with what they are, but like we can start to explore what they are. And then you can ask me the questions that you would normally ask someone and kind of use me as a little bit of a guinea pig to get to be an understanding. Because I think really, I know the Enneagram is a great tool and I know a lot of people use it. It's just not one that I happen to use. But I would love for people to know more about this. And perhaps in that episode, we could talk a little bit more about that as well as human design as well, because human design is getting a lot of talk.
Yep.
I have a lot of friends that are practitioners of human design, and that is another tool that we can show people for their toolbox if they're looking for ways to just gain a deeper understanding of who they are and how they navigate this thing called life. Would you be interested in that?
Oh my gosh. Sign me up.
All right, cool. So when we get off, note to self, taking the free Enneagram quiz. So I'm going to be going where everybody needs to go, which is martaspirk.com. It's martaspirk.com. All of the links to both the quiz and Marta's website will be in the show notes, and you're going to want to look for episode, whatever number it's going to be, but it's going to be part 2 of our conversation. And if anybody wants to follow Marta, they can also follow her on Instagram and Facebook at Marta Spirk. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was so fun. And there's
what
more.
A wild ride you've had. And I'm really excited to go take this Enneagram quiz, find out what my type is, and get to learn a little bit more about myself. The teacher's always learning,
Yes. Oh my gosh. 100%. Yeah. I'm super excited.
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. If you like this episode and you're curious, you're going to want to be looking in the show notes for part 2 of this conversation where she actually goes over my Enneagram type and we start exploring, what my experiences were that caused me to be a certain type and where I am today. And if you like this episode, you're going to want to check out all of my episodes. You can find it where you find all of your podcasts. It's Flip That Shit. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.